Once upon a time,
in a land far away.
I'm Katrina.
And I'm Geoff.
This is the Fairy Tellers Podcast.
Myth, legend, folklore, fable.
We explore what they say about cultures then and now,
Grab a hot cup of cocoa and a comfy seat
while we tell you a tale.
Welcome back to the podcast for, you guessed it, another exciting episode.
Oh my gosh. I'm glad I said something about it like at the beginning of the year where I was like, how about this year you don't? And you're like, now I'm going to do it even harder.
But yeah, we're back. Good to be back. Yeah. Recording. It hasn't actually been that long. It feels like it's been a bit.
Like the famous time-traveling 90s animated film, we're back.
Deep cut. Before we get into the episode too, something exciting. I went and checked our reviews. It has been so long since we've had one. I was like, I don't think there's going to be a new review because it's been a long time since there has been one. But there has been. I was very excited. It's been over a month since there's been a new review. January 10th, Ooh. Christina Whiskey, WSKI, wrote a review, a 5-star review. Thank you.
Ooh.
And said, I love, all caps, all of those loves, this podcast.
Aww.
I usually listen on Spotify, but I'm not sure you see reviews over there. I don't know how to find them. So if someone could teach me, I would love that. I feel like such an old person. I have looked, but I also don't use Spotify. So it's like, sign in to Spotify. And then it's like, I try to go to reviews and it's like, you can't leave a review until you've listened to these episodes. And I was like, what? I'm not trying to. Anyway, usually listens on Spotify. Not sure if you see the reviews are there. I don't. So I'm putting this here. I get so excited when I realize you have a new podcast out. I usually love to play to previous ones while I'm sleeping as my white noise. Where can I find your past 6 years worth of podcasts? They want more. I want to give them more. You can definitely find them. Again, not being a podcast listener, are you not able to listen to our entire backlog on Spotify?
I would assume that you can listen to all of the backlog on Spotify.
Might have to do some research and see if it's for some reason, if there's a setting that we can do that makes it so that they're available. If they're not, I'm totally going to make sure that we do that. If not, I do believe you can get the entire backlog on Apple Podcasts. Last resort, I definitely know for a fact that they are on Podbean, which is our hosting platform that then pushes it out to all the other podcasting, apps and services and whatever. So if you are having trouble finding it, then you can try one of those alternatives. But I'm also going to look into seeing how we can make sure that you can get it on your preferred listening platform of choice. And thank you for your excellent review. We love that you love us. And I'm glad that our dulcet tones help put you to sleep.
I'm like, I am white noise for sure. Me suddenly just singing random songs from Feifel Goes West.
Love it.
You're on a mouse trap, a giant mouse trap.
Feifel Goes West, the last appearance of Jimmy Stewart in a film as the voice of the sheriff dog guy.
I was about to say his last appearance.
His voice.
Yes, yeah. So today we are going back to let's be real, little project. We're kind of doing a course, a fairy tale course. We're following a curriculum loosely because basically what we set out to do, what we are trying to achieve, is creating supplemental material in podcast form that could possibly be used for a course on fairy tales. Whether people want to use it or not, I'm at least making the content, the concept. We'll see what comes of it. Maybe nothing. And at the very least, you'll get some episodes. And as we talked about the first episode that we did about this, the format of our podcast episode is basically going to be exactly the same, which is we talk about a concept or introduce something related to fairy tales. Then we retell some fairy tales and then we wrap up the concept. But I am following a sample curriculum that is found in the book Teaching Fairy Tales, edited by Nancy L. Canepa. And the curriculum that we are loosely following was created by Linda Krause Worley. So today we are going to be talking about, we're actually on the syllabus, skipping to week 3 of the syllabus. And we're skipping over week 2. And I do have a reason why we are doing that. And I'll get to that.
Midterms are coming up. we got to catch up. We've not been keeping up with the,
No, I knew that like if we were doing it, I was like, listen,
it's asynchronous.
yeah, it's an asynchronous class.
This is an asynchronous class.
Yeah.
It defies all labels of semester, term, university, accreditation of any kind.
Yeah. And also, yeah, we had planned like, hey, we're probably going to do one of these type of episodes a month and then, do like our last episode, a fun, slappy, happy, fun time of, keeping it a little more light, a little more silly, a little more loosey goosey.
Yeah.
Not to mention that for week 2 under this curriculum, some of the stories that they have listed are Molly Whoopie and Muncie Meg from Grandfather Tales, American English Folk Tales. We've actually already done an episode.
Yeah, on both of those.
Yeah, talking about those. So
was it the same episode?
I'm pretty sure it was.
Makes sense that it would be.
Yeah. So yeah, we are gonna do an episode on that because that week is covering social and historical interpretations for like folklore and fairy tale, which is essentially what we talk about on this podcast all the time, which is why I wanted to do it next or like later, because today I was going to get this one out of the way because I already said before, I'm less into it.
Yeah.
But it is talking a little bit about Freud and Jung and psychoanalytic interpretations for fairy tales, which hopefully it's still going to be fun. Obviously, it's going to be fun because I'm going to be reading some excerpts from a book out loud for all of us, and we can all enjoy that, which we will. But what's funny is as I was like picking out quotes and stuff to read, I was like, am I going to be able to read this with a straight face? Am I going to be able to? But
it's a podcast. It's an audio podcast.
Yeah, they can't see my face.
No one will be able to see the ridiculous faces you're pulling. Only I will get to enjoy them.
But don't worry, my tone will definitely give it away. It's fine. But anyway, so yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the psychoanalytic approach to looking at folklore and fairy tales, specifically fairy tales. That's what this podcast is about. But speaking of like both of those, the social and cultural like approach to looking at fairy tales, and then also like psychoanalytic analytic approaches to looking at fairy tales, I have a quote from Dr. Gina Jorgensen. So in Dr. Gina Jorgensen's book, Fairy Tales 101, she has a chapter on interpretive and analytic approaches to fairy tales. And I like what she said very intelligently. And I was like, if I try to explain this, it'll be much less intelligent. So I was like, ooh, I will put her words into my mouth and maybe I'll sound a little intelligent. Interpretation refers to the quest for meaning, while analysis refers to breaking things down into their component parts in order to understand them better. An interpretive approach to fairy tales is looking for meaning, asking how we make sense of these things, while an analytic approach is asking which parts make up the whole, how they relate to each other, and how that informs our overall understanding of them. As you can see, these terms are very close in meaning. It's probably fine to use them interchangeably in this context. I was like, I love that.
Yeah, that is an interesting distinction that I would like. There is a distinction between the two.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how I would probably often use them interchangeably. But it is good to know because I don't know, like I think there are times when it does make a difference. Like I would say probably a majority of what we do on our podcast is interpretive, which I feel like interpretive can be like a little more loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
Especially like my random comments that I make when I'm just like responding to them in real time. Whereas when you are like talking about, tale types and then comparing tale types, you are like analyzing them because you're breaking up into the components and parts and comparing them and contrasting with one another to see what similarities there are between them.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
And so in some ways it's like the social historical approach to looking at them. It does give like a framework to look at, examine the tales, but a lot more in context to the time period, the cultural context in which it is, as opposed to like the psychoanalytic approach, which it is trying to look at these like universals. I'll say like right up front that this is an approach that is been being used like less and less and less. But it is one that people need to be aware of, has been used in the past to look at as like a lens, a framework to look at fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to know where we have been looking at that. But because so much of it was based off of like Freud and Jung, like, which if anybody studies psychology, they know we've come a long way since that of like understanding and looking at psychology and human development. And so, like, obviously, as those people who, like, the people who you would think would be the most likely to use that, Freud was talking about psychology. Psychologists don't use that anymore. They still study and learn about, understand where he started off, but that's not how it's viewed anymore. And so it makes sense that also when that lens was being used more broadly for a lot of different things and people were examining then fairy tales using it, as we know more, we've like learned more about like psychology, we use that framework less. And so you would be pretty hard pressed to find a folklorist who, you know, is like diehard Freud, wants to use that framework exclusively for analyzing like folklore and fairy tale. But again, it's important to be able to look at what has been said in the past. And also, I think for our purposes on this podcast, it's a little fun. Just because like some of the things that they talk about, it's like, oh, wow. Oh, okay. So in this curriculum, it's showed that like some of the assigned reading is the introduction to the book, The Uses of Enchantment, The Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales by Bruno Bettelheim. And one of the reasons why she wants people to look at that chapter, but not like buy the book, is again, it's important to know where we started from or like what approaches have been used and like what was said about them. And I just wanted to say the first time I ever picked up this book was in 2015. This book was absolutely written in mind for what I at the time was researching, which was early childhood education and using folklore and fairy tale in early childhood education. And so when I picked up this book, because there are some, we've talked about this before on the podcast too, there are some early childhood teaching methods that focus a lot on fairy tales as a basis for like literature, and also that it's like calming for the psyche of children, like it helps them grow, except that, like I said earlier, it does not fully align with what we know now about like childhood development. And so when I first picked up this book in like 2015, trying to understand why, you know, teaching fairy tales to children or like using fairy tales as a base for both like as literature and like teaching children about the world, helping to shape their understanding of the world. As I was trying to read this, I was getting so frustrated and angry reading this book because I was like, please don't talk to me about Freud. Don't talk to me about Jung. And like some of the things that the author was talking about where they're like, oh, no, children like need this like innately. I'm like, wrong. Absolutely wrong. And I will tell people that this book was written in like the 1970s. It sounded less crazy at the time that it was like contemporary to it. But so that people get a little bit of the flavor. And that it's, again, my way of like marking up books, Geoff, is when I like argue with the author, like in the book where I'm just like, no, wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, like there's this one where I was like, what a beautiful note that you wrote in this book, Katrina. On page 27, fables demand and threaten they are moralistic, or they just entertain. To decide whether a story is a fairy tale or something entirely different, one might ask whether it could rightly be called a love gift to a child. That is not a bad way to arrive at a classification. And in the notes I wrote, it actually is a bad way to arrive at a classification.
That's so funny.
And when he says like we need to ask ourselves if this could rightly be called a love gift to a child, he's quoting like Lewis Carroll, who like in a poem was calling like myths a love gift to give to a child. Child of the pure unclouded brow and dreaming eyes of wonder, though time be fleet and I and thou are half a life asunder, thy loving smile will surely hail the love gift of a fairy tale. Which, no shade on Lewis Carroll for, like, writing that and Through the Looking Glass.
Yeah, because he wasn't making such a statement as like, no, this is the definition of what a fairy tale is.
Yeah.
If you can't call it a love gift to a child, then it's not a fairy tale.
Yeah.
No, he was just saying that like, oh, like a fairy tale can be a love gift that you give. Yeah.
I'm like, except that. I'm like, Lewis Carroll, you are also wrong. Because I'm like, since we know like the history of like a lot of the like contes de fées, like the stories of fairy or whatever, were formed in the French salon, or were being like told as like, fun entertainment, body tales, like in just like people's households to other adults, to like whatever. And so it's like when we think of like fairy tales, we actually are thinking about stories that like are told to adults, like from adults to adults. Right. And so it is also like Lewis Carroll. What a beautiful sentiment.
I mean, I think, I don't know. Again, I don't have the entire context of what he's written, but just to give, I mean, and like honestly, what I do think too, and where I like understand what he's saying or think I understand what he's saying, it's like, yes, that can be true. Like that this story was told by an adult to another adult, but it can also be something that you share with a child and they can also get joy out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just because it was by an adult, written for an adult, doesn't mean you can't also like spread joy to a child with it. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to be more.
Yeah.
But I do think the thing about it is like it does contribute to that, like the thinking that, oh, fairy tales are for children.
Yeah.
Fairy tales can be for children. Doesn't mean that they are for children or have to be for children, which is why the first person that you were quoting from the book from like the 70s or whatever is wrong, because by trying to define it based on whether or not you could tell a child a tale, that is not what does or does not make a fairy tale.
Yes.
I love that you argue with the authors like in
when I'm
margins of your books. I was thinking about that this week, honestly.
Just about like me like scribbling tirades like in a book.
Yeah. Well, because I was reading something and like thinking about it, I was like, oh, I don't really like agree with that person had said, you know what I mean? In whatever book that I happen to be reading. But like I feel like I just must enter a completely different state of mind than you do while reading, where it's like, while I'm in the reading of the book, unless they say something that like just really, really rubs me the wrong way, I will lean into it. I'd be like, I'm accepting your whatever premise you are presenting in this moment. I'm accepting that for like what it is.
Yeah.
Looking for its own like internal consistency with what they're saying. And then after that, I'll step outside and be like, how does that relate to the things that I know, that I believe, that I think, and other things that I've like learned, but like I usually kind of just like give myself in as like, okay, I'm going to give you the leeway to like make your point.
Yeah.
Even if I ultimately will like disagree with it, I'm just like, I'm more likely to like lean into it, where it's like, I just love then thinking like, no, Katrina would just be like scrawling next to them, like, no, you're wrong. You're stupid. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
There's actually like, there's part of me, cause like, as I was like reading this book, cause I was like, okay, 2015 me, I was reading it for like a different reason. Like I was reading it to be convinced why I should lean into like giving my like toddler children this like basis of fairy tale knowledge. I was kind of like, okay, convince me why this is a good preschool approach for me, not just even for my kids even, but like for like if I'm, teaching preschool. And I was getting really irate with it. And so this time when I was reading it, I was trying to come at it from like a lens of like, okay, what's he getting at?
And you were like, but I thought they were even more wrong than ever.
No, I feel like I was able slightly to be like, okay, like what are you trying to say? Like, what is the point of what you're trying to say? So that I could think of like what more specifically
is wrong about what.
Yes. But I was like, I felt like the way I was reading it was like more exhausting for me, like mentally.
Yeah, no, totally.
Trying to like suspend my like disbelief, or to be like, I'm trying to like listen to understand. Because I'd feel like I'd get to the end of a sentence and I'd be like, okay, yes to half of that, no to half of that. Then get to the end of another sentence and be like, you know what? Yes. And then get to the end of another sentence and be like, no, you arrived at the complete wrong conclusion. Or like, because I'd be like, oh, I agree. And then he'd get to like his point and I'd be like, no.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Because like some of like what he's saying. So for instance, this is in like the introduction to the book. where it is talking about fairy tales and the existential predicament. In order to master the psychological problems of growing up, overcoming narcissistic disappointments, Oedipal dilemmas, sibling rivalry, becoming able to relinquish childhood dependencies, gaining a feeling of selfhood and of self-worth and a sense of moral obligation, a child needs to understand what is going on within his conscious self so that he can also cope with that which goes on in his unconscious. And I agree to that because like basically what it's saying is like when you are a child, and this is what comes with like also knowing more about like early childhood development and like how brains develop and like work, is that there are things that children cannot grasp because their brains are not fully developed, because their brains are still like developing. And so there are like issues where, you know, children are going to need help overcoming narcissistic disappointments. Because two children, especially if we're talking about like toddlers, but it's very true for a very long time, even like, you know, into like teen years, everything is all about them. Everything, it's very self-focused. Everything is like me. And it's not because children are like, oh, you're a spoiled brat. No, that's how your brain is like hardwired to be.
Developmentally.
Yeah, developmentally, that's just it. And so I lean very much like on the side of like, kids are not trying to be manipulative. They're not trying to be upsetting. They're not trying to disappoint you in any way. Like they are trying to develop. They're trying to like grow and learn. But it says he can achieve this understanding and with it the ability to cope, not through rational comprehension of the nature and content of his unconscious, but by becoming familiar with it through spinning out daydreams, ruminating, rearranging, and fantasizing about suitable story elements in response to unconscious pressures. And again, here's where I'm like, because I don't outrightly, completely disagree with that, because we know that imaginative play is really, really good for children to start problem solving when there's not like a problem, like learning how to like kind of walk through different like social interactions, problem solving that they might have to do like later, like that's like good for them. But it gets a little complicated when we're talking about like needing to reach out to a child's unconscious to get their behavior to change, because it really is like, no, children really do need you to make conscious the things that are unconscious to them. Because it's not so much that children's feelings are unconscious to them or activated on an unconscious level, so much as they do not have the language to express themselves. They don't have the ability to be self-examining. And so it's not that like they have like an unconscious rage boiling beneath the surface when they're like upset that you took away a toy. It's not an unconscious like rage or them being like, oh, they feel the betrayal from a nurturing figure. They're mad because you took a toy away from them. And they don't have like the self-awareness to reflect on like, why am I so upset about this? Oh, I'm upset that they took the toy away. I really wanted to play with that toy. Oh, and I have the language to say to somebody, hey, that really upset me when you took my toy away. Like that has to be modeled for them. And it's not making the unconscious conscious. And you don't activate that by like telling them a story that also involves like an element of rage, but dressed up as like a man turning into an ogre. Like, no, you can actually just, you know, sing a Daniel Tiger song like, when you feel so mad that you want to roar, take a deep breath. And so as I'm reading this book, I'm like, I don't know how useful this actually is in like teaching you how to like use fairy tales to help your kids become a more actualized human beings. And I'm like, this is a pretty lofty goal, I feel like, because I'll just read from like the very first paragraph of The Struggle for Meaning. If we hope to live, not just from moment to moment, but in true consciousness of our existence, then our greatest need and most difficult achievement is to find meaning in our lives. It is well known how many have lost the will to live and have stopped trying because such meaning has evaded them. An understanding of the meaning of one's life is not suddenly acquired at a particular age, nor even when one has reached chronological maturity. On the contrary, gaining a secure understanding of what the meaning of one's life may or ought to be This is what constitutes having attained psychological maturity. And this achievement is the end result of a long development. At each age, we seek and must be able to find some modicum of meaning congruent with how our minds and understanding have already developed. Today, as in times past, the most important and also the most difficult task in raising a child is helping him to find meaning in life. I'm like, that is such a lofty goal. And I don't know if this book actually teaches you how fairy tales can like do that.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that to say, let's have a little fun with looking at the story. I love, this is one quote that Dr. Gina Jorgensen pulled out, and she says in the book that she uses when she's teaching her class to kind of like show people what all we're diving into when we're examining the like psychoanalytic approach and like reading books like this one. I'll just use the clip that she pulled out because it's very short of a quote from a much longer chapter or like section of a chapter. And in this, Bruno Bettelheim, he's talking about the Cinderella story and psychologically what we can get from the point at which the prince is identifying Cinderella via the shoe. She, being Cinderella, she selects him, the prince, because he appreciates her in her dirty sexual aspects, lovingly accepting her vagina in the form of the slipper, and approves of her desire for a penis, symbolized by her tiny foot fitting within the slipper vagina.
What the heck?
I love Dr. Gina Jorgensen. She says, this is a great quote to horrify students with, but otherwise it's off-putting because it's so darn vague. Vague.
Didn't seem that vague to me, Gina.
And then, if Cinderella's foot is a penis, is everyone else's foot a penis? When is a foot a penis or not? Is a slipper always a vagina?
Well put, well put.
And I love that just because like those questions, that's kind of like what the issue comes down to. When we're talking about like this symbolism or kind of like a universal psyche, a universal like understanding of like symbols, there's not. Symbols are very much based on like cultural context for people.
Right.
And so if you are saying, oh, a shoe symbolizes a vagina, always universally true? Does a foot always represent, or just sometimes is it universal or is it not? So
yeah.
So when I say like, you know, we can have a little fun with the uses of enchantment, but also like when it comes to like how useful is it today for analyzing stuff, a little rough. And so what I thought would be fun, since it's February, I mean, we missed Valentine's Day. So this is, you know, it's not a Valentine's Day episode. I thought that we would retell a romantic story so that we can talk about the horrors of overcoming intimate relationships. Children who should be like rightly like shielded from sexual relationships, and how fairy tales help children to kind of like bridge that gap unconsciously so that when they are married, they stop seeing their husbands as like monstrous. I don't know if we are going to learn that today or if we're just going to laugh that someone would think so. But I thought that we would retell the story of Snow White and Rose Red. So Jeff and I actually did a bonus episode of this story the year that we were doing the Snow White tales. When Maria Tatar's book, The Fairest of Them All, came out, we did a series of Snow White episodes, but Snow White and Rose Red, which is found in the complete fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, is not actually a story about Snow White the way that we know Snow White. She has the same name, completely different person, and she has a sister named Rose Red. It's kind of implied in the story that they could be twins because their mom named them after the 2 rose bushes that she had in her front yard. But yeah, completely different from whatever Snow White you're thinking of. Totally different story, not even the same tale type. They share a name. Literally nothing else. So, once upon a time, there was a poor widow. See, Dad's dead this time. Great. Anyway, so there was a poor widow, and she lived all alone in a small cottage. And in front of her cottage, she had these 2 rose bushes, one that made white roses, one that made red roses. And so she named her daughters after these rose bushes, presumably before she was a widow. I don't know. Maybe the kids never met their dad. People be dying.
That's true.
Yep. Anyway, so yeah, Snow White and Rose Red. And one thing that I like about this story is that these 2 girls are not pitted against each other. A lot of the times when we see 2 sisters or like 3 sisters, you've got good sisters and you've got bad sisters. These sisters are both good sisters, but they are different from each other because Snow White was more quiet and more gentle than her sister Rose Red, who preferred to always be running around out in the meadows and the fields and gathering flowers and catching butterflies. And Snow White was more likely to stay at home with her mother, helping her with housework, reading to her, hand stitching, like that kind of stuff. So they had different interests, but they also loved each other so much, and they were often seen running around, skipping with each other, holding hands, and singing. And Snow White one day was heard to say, "Let us never leave each other." And Rose Red answered, "Never as long as we live." And then their mother added, "Whatever one of you has, remember to share it with the other." Which you would think would become a problem in this love story that we're about to tell. But it's not. Everybody calm down. Only wonderful things. Just kidding. It feels like it's like a setup to, if it, like another polygamist Snow White story. No, only in Ireland. Definitely an episode people should go back and listen to. Gold Tree, Silver Tree. It was,
one of my favorites, probably. Was it Ireland or Scotland?
It might be Scotland. Because I think there was one that was like a Scottish tale, and then one that was like the King of Ireland's daughter. And I think those were in like the same episode. Geoff likes that story so much because it speaks to his subconscious desire as a man to have multiple women.
Thanks, Freud.
Just kidding. It is
Scottish.
It's a wonderful story. Oh, the gold tree and silver tree.
And also, it's when you'd say like a polygamous Snow White tale, you wouldn't think like, oh, like it's kind of like a girl power, heavy like tale, but it totally is.
It was like, and it was it was a good episode. I feel like because when we're looking at it through a feminist lens, it's super fascinating because it defies those kind of like gender and marriage like expectations for women. We're used to stories that are pitting women like against each other, and like that was not it.
Yeah.
Just like this story, Snow White and Rose Red, these sisters are not in competition with each other.
Love it when they get along.
Yeah. Absolutely great. So let's see who they do end up beefing with.
Wouldn't be a story if they weren't beefing with somebody. You can't not have conflict.
Yeah, this can't be just like a happy story where like nothing bad happens, everything good happens. Boring, lame. Because our unconscious desire is for conflict.
Because we all want to kill our fathers and marry our mothers or something.
Oh, not me. I'm a woman.
So
I have penis envy.
Yeah. So you wish that you had a penis so that you could then want to kill your father. Because ultimately, you want to sleep with your mother.
Yes. Yeah, we figured it out. Or we got even farther away than Freud ever thought we could.
One or the other.
Yeah. So they often went wandering together in the forest, gathering up berries to eat, to bring home to their sweet mother. And the animals never harmed them because the animals trusted them and they trusted the animals. Still everything wonderful. I love it. The little hare would eat a cabbage leaf out of their hands. The roe grazed by their side. The stag leapt merrily around them. And the birds sat still on their branches and sang whatever tune they knew. Nothing bad ever happened to the girls. And it goes on to be like, they could stay out all night long and nothing bad would happen to them. I'm like, oh my gosh. What kind? These are like the quintessential Disney princesses. Like if anybody ever, like this singing to the birds and the birds like flying to them. And it's just like, oh, beautiful, lovely. So it includes this like tiny little like story that's an aside, but it reminds me just this like little clip of the story that we told in Dear Millie, where you had this like little angel that was like leading this girl. And it was like she was already dead. But just this like one weird paragraph where they're like, one night they spent the entire night out in the forest, and when the morning sun came up and awoke them, they saw a beautiful child in white, glistening, standing beside them and looking at them in a friendly way. And the child then like walks out into the forest and leaves them. And when they look around to where the child had been standing, the child was standing on like the edge of a cliff, and they had almost walked that way the night before they had like decided to sit down and like fall asleep. And so they knew that they were like being looked over by some kind of heavenly presence, making sure that they were always like safe in this wood, not walking like over a cliff. Their mother told them that the child must have been the angel who watches over good children. It's like, yes, only good children who, do everything always completely right and say their prayers, don't walk off of cliffs. Only naughty children walk over cliffs. Anyway, so Snow White, Rose Red, always helping their mother, keeping her cottage clean, taking care of the house, putting flowers in vases for their mom, whatever it was. Because, man, it goes on and on, Geoff, where it's like, the kettle was made out of brass, but it glistened like gold because it was polished so clean. In the evening, when the snowflakes fell, the mother said, "Go, Snow White, and bolt the door." Then they sat down at the hearth, and their mother put on her glasses and read aloud from a large book, probably the Bible, while the two girls sat and spun as they listened. On the ground next to them lay a little lamb, and behind them sat a white dove with its head tucked under its wing. I'm like, okay, guys, getting a little sick of this. So one night while they were in their house sitting together, there was a knock on the door and someone was calling as if they wanted to, like be let in. And so the mother was like, "Oh, Rose Red, can you go get the door? Maybe it's a traveler looking for shelter," which I'm like, "Ma'am, that's so dangerous." Like, we're just three women living out alone in the woods. Who's knocking on our door at night? We should open it up. I'm like, "Oh, I'm so scared for you." Anyway, Rose Red went over, pushed back the bolt of the door, and opened it up, thinking, if it's a poor beggar, we can like help him. And when she opened it up, it was a giant bear. It said he stuck his thick black-haired head through the door. So it's a big black bear that then starts walking when she opens the door. And Rose Red jumped back and started screaming, which, good. Finally, we have like something that's happening besides this, like whatever. And it's like the lamb started bleating and the dove was fluttering its wings. Snow White hid herself behind the mother's bed. But the bear started to talk and it said, "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. I'm half frozen outside. And I just wanted to warm myself here a little bit. If you're cold, they're cold. Bring them inside." He's like, "Everybody chill out. It's just real cold outside." Which, yeah, I like personally, when we had that like cold snap that was like coming down through, it was like this Arctic blast that was coming, and it was like nights of like definitely below freezing temperatures, but it was like below 0 Celsius, 0 Fahrenheit. Like I was thinking about like all of the critters that I know that live around my house.
All your buddies.
Yeah, because I'm like, we have skunks and rabbits and chipmunks and squirrels, and then like neighborhood cats and raccoon that all pass through my like backyard, in and out of like my backyard. And so I was like trying to leave them out like cups of snacks because I was like, I feel so bad. Like, that I'm like,
yeah, no, that's fair.
Because I'm like, I have access to furnace and fires and like lots of blankets, and I just kept thinking about anyway. And I was thinking about the little woodland creatures because I am also a very, very good girl. A pretty, pretty princess. So immediately the mother was like, "You poor bear, come and lay down by our fire. We'll make sure that like you don't get too close because we don't want your fur to burn." And so she called her daughters to like come out from like hiding and help her to get the bear like comfortable and situated and everybody calm down for the night. And she's like, "I know he means well," which again, lovely, darling, couldn't be me. As much as I cared about the critters that were outside, I didn't invite any of them into my house. I will be honest with you. Not even the chipmunks,
Yeah.
But anyway, So both of the girls, they came out and everybody got nice and comfortable. And the bear said, "Come, children, dust the snow off my coat a little." And so they got a broom and they were sweeping his fur nice and clean. And then he stretched himself in front of the fire. And it said, uttering growls to show how content and comfortable he was, like a nice, like a purring kitten. So it said it didn't take them long to get accustomed to one another. They, all started to, it sounded like they were all kind of like hanging out over multiple days. Said the clumsy guest had to put up with the mischievous pranks of the girls. They tugged his fur with their hands, planted their feet upon his back, and rolled him over. Or they took a hazel switch and hit him. When he growled, they just laughed. The bear took everything in good spirit. I seriously am like, oh my gosh, like this is like so ridiculous. Only when they became too rough did he cry out, "No, no, girls, let me live." Which I'm like, that's hilarious. Just like imagining like this big bear being like, "Oh no, don't kill me. Don't hurt me." It's all fun. "Snow White, Rose Red, should you beat your suitor dead?" is what he would say, which, their suitor, but he's a bear. It is all in jest. We are having a funny good time. Anyway, so they would all go to sleep, and when the girls had gone to bed, the mother would say to the bear, "You're welcome, in God's name, to lie down by the hearth. Then you'll be protected from the cold and bad weather." All during that winter, he would kind of like come and go in and out of their house, like hanging out with them. And the girls would play with him as much as they wanted to, and he was like good-spirited about it. And finally, when it was apparent that spring had appeared, everything was green outside, the bear said to Snow White, "Now I must go away, and I shall not return the entire summer." And Snow White was like, "Well, where are you going? Where are you going, dear bear?" And he was like, "Well, I have to go back into the forest and guard my treasures from these wicked dwarves that exist out in these woods. When it's winter, the ground is frozen hard. So like they have to stay underground and they can't work their way up into the top to be causing trouble in the woods. But now that everything's thawing, the ground is softer, they're going to be able to like come up from the ground and start trying to steal my treasure and mess stuff up for me." It says, "Once they get something in their hands and carry it to their caves, it will not easily see the light of day again." So he's like, "I've got to go protect my stuff." And Snow White was very sad to know that he was leaving, but she unlocked the door and let the bear hurry out. But as he was hurrying out, he got caught a little bit on the bolt of the door and a piece of his fur ripped off. It said, "It seemed to Snow White that she saw gold glimmering through the fur, but she wasn't sure." And the bear hurried away and soon disappeared beyond the trees, which I was glad that it wasn't like he like gets a tuft of fur and then like what, it turns into like skin. Like it suddenly untransforms. Gross.
That would have, been disgusting.
Do you like how I imagined something nasty happening when there didn't need to be anything nasty happening?
Yeah, Freud would have something to say about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's something wrong with my psyche, 100p. Anyway, so the girls were sad, but Snow White was the saddest to see the bear go for the summer. But pretty soon afterward, as things were heating up, thawing out, their mom was like, "Hey, it's time for us to start being out in the woods more, doing our seasonal chores of like gathering up wood again, looking for berries, planting our garden, like doing all those kind of things." So she sent the girls out to go gather up some firewood for her. So Snow White, Rose Red skipped off merrily out into the forest to gather up some firewood, and they found a large tree lying on the ground that had already been chopped down. But there was something that was jumping up and down on the grass near the trunk, and they could not tell from far away what it was. It looked kind of nuts. And so they got closer and they saw that it was a dwarf with an old withered face, and he had a beard that was snow white and a yard long, which I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty long beard.
A very impressive beard.
Yeah, good looking. But the tip of the beard was caught in the crack of the tree that he had obviously just like chopped over. Somehow his beard got caught in like a crack of the tree.
That's why, long facial hair is... I'm making this. I was going to say not OSHA approved or whatever. It was like, I don't actually know if that's true, but it dangerous.
Yeah.
You don't want your facial hair getting caught.
That's why you got to wear a beard net.
I think that's more for
sanitary food situation.
But
no, like it's like, it is OSHA like standard that you have to have your hair pulled back. Like if you're a person who has long hair,
right.
And the reason why you have to pull it back is so that your hair doesn't get sucked into a mechanism and then ripped out of your head. So I would assume for beards, it's the same thing. So, but this dwarf, not OSHA approved facial hair. But anyway, the little fellow was jumping back and forth like a dog on a rope and like didn't know what to do. So he's just like screaming and freaking out, like clawing at it. So these girls, they're coming closer to him because they're like, oh no, a little somebody in distress. We'll save you, little one. Because that's how they are. But the dwarf glared at the girls with his fiery red eyes and screamed, what are you standing there for? Can't you come over here faster and help me? It's like, oh my gosh, buddy, I know you're upset. Calm down. You're acting ridiculous. But the girls were like, oh, Rose Red was like, what happened? How did you get yourself in this little predicament? And he was like, you stupid nosy goose. So I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm petty. If somebody's going to be calling me names like that, I guess you're going to figure out your own problem by yourself.
Yeah.
But he's like, I wanted to split the tree to get some wood for my kitchen. We dwarves need but little food. However, it gets burned fast when we use those thick logs. We don't devour such large portions as you coarse and greedy people. He's like, you wouldn't understand what kind of wood I need for my wood businesses. And they're like, oh my gosh. I had just driven in the wedge safely and everything would have gone all right, but the cursed wedge was too smooth and it sprang out unexpectedly. So yeah, he was using, if you will, like a wedging tool that it's like you stick the tool in and then when you hit it with like a hammer or whatever, it drives that wedge deeper into like the tree to split it. But I guess his was too smooth and so it shot out and then the crack that he had propped open with the wedge went down, pinched down on his beard. And he also couldn't probably, I'm assuming, reach the wedge wherever it had shot off to once his beard was like pinned in place.
So it was at least a yard away.
Yeah. And so him like the dog on a rope, like tugging at the end of it. Anyway, so he's like, and all you silly cream-faced things could do is laugh at me. You're just nasty. What? Jeez Louise. So, but the girls, good-natured, sweet as they were, good people, they went over and they were trying as hard as they could to like help him like pull his beard out, but obviously he just, kept screaming and freaking out. And Rose Red was like, you know what, I'll run off and I'll go get somebody who's like maybe stronger than us, like that can do it. And the dwarf was like, you crazy fool. Why run and get someone? The two of you are already enough. Can't you think of anything better? Which I'm like, man, when I'm coming up with solutions and somebody else is like, I'm just going to keep saying no to trying anything else. I'm like, okay. I would have lost so much patience with this, Geoff, for real. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but Snow White told him, don't be so impatient. I'll think of something. So she took out a pair of scissors from her pocket that she had, I'm assuming for, just needlework and whatnot that you just have carrying around. And so she just snipped just the tip of his beard off. I just got done reading The Hobbit with my children, and it is amazing to me like how often like when you're talking to dwarves in that universe, like things that they'll say is like, may your beard ever grow longer, may your beard continue to grow, may your like beard flow ever outward. And like we're like Tolkien had really brought up this like idea that like dwarves, how long their beard can get, it's like sacred to them, like in a way. And so I do feel like I understand why he would be upset that she decided to solve the problem by chopping the tip of his beard off. Because to him, that was an absolutely no of like an option, but also everything at that point was a no to him, like option wise. So
yeah, he was not accepting any solutions whatsoever.
Yeah. So she, snipped the tip of his beard off. And once he was free, he grabbed a sack filled with gold that was lying right by their feet. And he yelled out, you uncouth slobs. How could you cut off a piece of my fine beard? Good riddance to you. And swinging the sack over his shoulder, he went away, poof, lickety-split, without even glancing back at the girls. Which I'm like, dude, at no point were these girls like, oh, well, he's trapped. Let's steal this like bag of treasure like from him. Man, I just like, this guy needs to be way more grateful than he is, but he's awful. Anyway, so sometime after this, Snow White and Rose Red, they went back out again to do more like outside chores. So it's like weeks later. after their little misadventure with the dwarf. They're going down to a little lake so that they can catch some fish for dinner. And as they approach the brook, they see something like a large grasshopper bouncing toward the water as if it wanted to jump in. So they ran over and they recognized their old friend, the dwarf. Anyway, Rose Red asked very politely, "Where are you going? You don't want to jump in the water, do you?" And he's like, "I'm not such a fool as that. Don't you see that the cursed fish is trying to pull me in?" So they look over, and the little man, clearly he'd been sitting there trying to fish, but the wind had caught his beard and entangled it in his fishing line. And then a fish had bitten like onto like his bait. And so the fish was like pulling the bait on the end of the line, but his end of the like his line was tangled up in his beard. And so he's getting pulled closer and closer toward the water and like freaking out. And so he was trying to stop himself from falling in. And so he had grabbed onto some of the reeds and rushes to try to help him, like not get pulled all the way in. So the girls were like, "Okay, like let's help you untangle your beard." So they're trying to untangle his beard from the line, and it's not helping. Everybody's screaming. Everybody's getting thrashed around. And by everybody, I mean just the dwarf. The fish probably wasn't screaming, but he's like screaming and freaking out. And he's like, "You bird brains, do something quickly." So finally, which again, I understand his beard is important to him, but also they're trying to help him very quickly. So they pull out the scissors and they snip the little bit of his beard that was like tied up on like the end out. Fish, took off, got away. And he was like, "You have disfigured my face like barbarians. It's not enough that you clipped the tip of my beard. Now you cut off some of the best parts. I can't show myself in front of my friends. May you both walk for miles on end until the soles of your shoes are burnt off." So that wasn't an actual curse on them, unlike other fairy tales where if you yell something like that, then like it happens. No, he was just being rude.
Right.
So then he grabs his sack of gold that was like sitting next to him by the reeds, and off he goes, disappearing behind a rock. So they're like, "Man, we cannot, this guy, it's always something with him." So weeks go by, and once again, their mother is sending them out to run an errand. She wants them to go down to the city to buy thread, needles, lace, and ribbons. And they needed to walk a pretty, good way out to get to where like the city and town are, where there's like a market where they can buy those things. So they're walking together and they look up, and a large bird is circling in the air above them, flying lower and lower until it finally landed on the ground not far away from a rock that was in front of them. And they start hearing this like horrible, terrified screaming. And so they start running in that direction to see like what the problem was. And they saw with horror that an eagle had seized their old acquaintance, the dwarf, and was trying to carry him off, which I've said this to you before, Geoff. When my daughter was like really, really little, there was like one moment when I saw a huge bird that was like perched really far away from us. And we were like out in the petrified forest. I don't know if people are familiar, but there are no trees in the petrified forest, except for like millions of year old trees that are rock. And so it's just like barren desert everywhere. And there was like a huge bird, and my daughter is an exceptionally small person. But yeah, I was always in that moment when this like big bird was like circling around my very, very small daughter. I was remembering these like videos that I had watched before of like birds grabbing toddlers, like eagles grabbing a toddler thinking it was like a rabbit or something. And I was like, please let a bird of prey not come and grab my daughter in this like open desert. But anyway, this dwarf, he was being grabbed in the open desert. Just kidding. It wasn't the open desert, but it was by this rock. So he's like trying to fight. So he's trying to fight this like eagle, and these like girls come around, to come and be verbally abused by this guy while he's getting grabbed by a bird. Anyway, so the girls like grab onto him and hold him as tightly as they can. So they're basically having a tug of war with this eagle, with this like dwarf in the middle. So of course he's like screaming and freaking out. And he's like, "Can't you handle me more carefully? You've torn my coat to shreds. It was thin enough to begin with, but now it's got holes and rips all over, you clumsy louts." And so he's like, yelling and screaming at them. But this time they did not chop his beard. They were able to like yank him free from the eagle. And so once that happened, once he was done verbally abusing them for saving him, he grabbed his sack of jewels and once again slipped under a rock into his cave. And it says that the girls by this time, they had gotten pretty used to like his ingratitude, his rudeness. And so they were like, whatever. It's funny because there are people in my life that I'm like that, where like they'll say these like just rude, inconsiderate things. And I'm kind of like, yeah, that's them. I'm not saying that people should hang out with people that treat them like that. I'm just saying, like, if you know somebody, like at work that just, or family members, I'm not talking about just like straight up, I don't know, this is straight up verbal abuse, but sometimes it's just like, yeah, you have to make the decision when you're trying to like keep your peace. Do I fight this? Do I say something? Or do I just try to like go on? It's a tough thing to figure out. But anyway, they were like, okay, whatever. He didn't say thank you. On to the city so we can buy the stuff that our mom sent us to go and get. And so then when they were coming back the other way, they came upon the dwarf who had just dumped out his sack of jewels onto like a clean, clear spot, not thinking that anybody was going to be passing through at that hour in the evening because, the sun was setting. He thought he was going to be by himself with his sack of jewels. And so when they came up behind him and like surprised him, the girls could see these like glistening stones of, it says, radiant different colors, glimmering and sparkling. And the dwarf saw them looking at his jewels and was like, why are you standing there and gaping? And his face, it said, his ashen gray face turned scarlet with rage. And he was about to start doing his usual verbally abusing and screaming at them when up behind them came a loud growl and a big black bear trotting out of the forest. So immediately the dwarf jumped up in terror, trying to like run to his hiding place. But the bear had already gotten between him and his hiding spot. And so it said, filled with fear, the dwarf cried out, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare my life and I'll give you all my treasures. Look at the beautiful jewels lying there. Grant me my life. What good is a small, measly fellow like me? You wouldn't be able to feel me between your teeth. Those wicked girls over there would be better for you to eat. They're such tender morsels, fat as young quails. Eat them instead." What a loser. But of course the bear did not listen at all to the dwarf's words, and it gave the dwarf a single blow with its paw, and the dwarf did not move again. Ooh, one mighty backhand with a bear paw. I've seen bear paws. I don't want to get backhanded by a bear paw. Like, I don't want the front half. I don't want the back half. Can you imagine getting bee-slapped by a bear?
Just knock your head off.
I guess maybe better. Yeah. Because I'm like, would that be better or worse than getting just front slapped by a bear? I don't know. But anyway, the girls had kind of like run to go and just like be away from like all that stuff going on. But the bear called out after them, "Snow White, Rose Red, don't be afraid. It's just me. I'll go with you." And so recognizing like his voice, they like stopped and they're like, "Oh, thank goodness." And as he came up close to them, his bear skin suddenly fell off, and there stood a handsome man clad completely in gold, which, thank goodness, when you get the, would you rather run into a bear or a man in the woods? And the girls are like, we choose the bear. And then he's like, psych, I'm a man. And now I'm going to take off my bear skin. They're like, no. Oh, okay. At least he's wearing clothes. I'm like, that's my thing. I'm like, ugh. Like, we had an annoying dwarf like yelling at us, but now some guy taking off his clothes. Just kidding. He was dressed. And he said, "I am the son of a king, and I have been cast under a spell by the wicked dwarf who stole my treasures. He forced me to run around the woods as a wild bear, and only his death could release me from the spell. Now he has received his justly earned punishment." So was this prince wandering around as a bear hunting down that dwarf?
I guess. Yeah, he wasn't the only one that had beef with the dwarf.
Yeah. Which I'm like, I guess those girls are pretty lucky because I guess he could do, a fair bit of magic and could have turned them into something too.
Yeah.
But anyway, now he's dead. So the story ends with Snow White was married to the prince and Rose Red to his brother, and they shared the great treasure that the dwarf had collected in his cave. The old mother lived many more peaceful and happy years with her children. Indeed, She took the 2 rose bushes with her, and they stood in front of her window, and every year they bore the most beautiful roses, white and red. And so both girls ended up married, not to the same man, even though their mom had told them to always share everything. They had to each just pick one man. So, going back to the uses of enchantment, the meaning and importance of fairy tales by Bruno Bettelheim. In this book, towards the end, it talks about the animal groom cycle of fairy tales. And we've encountered a lot talking on the podcast, obviously, because most people are familiar with East of the Sun, West of the Moon, Beauty and the Beast, Prince Marquesan that we talked about, who is like the pig, Hans my hedgehog. We've had several different tale examples of animal grooms to look back on, which is why I thought that this one would be like a good one to look at, just because, again, we retold it for a bonus episode on the Patreon account. But one, it's always different no matter how like we retell it. I'm actually a little interested to go back and see how many jokes I made that are the same. Like, I probably told this story too about, like, my daughter getting grabbed by a eagle, or me being like afraid. But the bear, the choosing a bear or choosing the man in the woods, I don't think that wasn't a thing that was being discussed on the internet yet when we made that last episode.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
But anytime we retell a story, it's like different. Not to mention, we're looking at it through this lens of the, psychoanalytic. So I thought it would be interesting. So when Bruno Bettelheim is talking about these animal groom cycles of fairy tales, one of the main things that they are pulling out of it is this idea that this is an unconscious and good way to address to children sexual material. Because he's arguing that children are too young to kind of be like having a sexually explicit talk with them about the nuances of, like, it's a kind of a forbidden, dangerous thing before you're married. But after you're married, it's good and you want it and it's like great. And so instead of having that conversation with your child, which is like beyond their ability to like comprehend, you can tell them stories with these animal grooms in them, because in these stories, it is usually that like the man is this kind of like monstrous, animalistic other. And that's how you want to feel about the opposite gender before you get married. That to give into any of those urges would be animalistic of you. But if you wait until you're ready to like be married to that person, once your love that would unlock a marriage will then also unlock that person's humanness that then would let you hook up with them. It's giving very much your foot is a penis and your shoe is a vagina, where it's like,
yeah, it's like that is not obvious.
Yes. To anyone on I don't think it's obvious to an adult on a conscious level that that's what the story is about. Let alone, I mean, maybe still on an unconscious level it is for me, and that's why I don't get it. It says, applying insights of deep psychology to these facets of the story, one begins to see the subtle meaning of what at first appears as serious shortcomings. We do not learn why the groom was forced to take on the form of an ugly animal, or why this harm inflicted on him remains unpunished. This suggests that the change from the natural or beautiful appearance took place in the unfathomable past, when we do not know why something happened to us, even when it had the most far-reaching consequences. Shall we say that the repression of sex occurred so early that it cannot be recalled? None of us can remember at what moment in our life sex first took on the form of something animal-like, something to be afraid of, to hide, to shun. It usually is tabooed much too early. We might recall that not long ago, many middle-class parents told their children that when they got married, then was the time to understand what sex was all about. It is hardly surprising in the light of this that in Beauty and the Beast, the former beast tells Beauty, a wicked fairy has condemned me to remain under that shape until a beautiful virgin should consent to marry me. Only marriage made sex permissible, changed it from something animal-like into a bond sanctified by the sacrament of marriage.
Okay.
One must assume that the inventors of these tales believed that to achieve a happy union, it is the female who has to overcome her view of sex as loathsome and animal-like. So, talking about this story specifically, there is a section on Snow White and Rose Red. And I thought it was really interesting because it talks about how there are two main female characters, I guess not including the mother, who usually they're showing that like the mothers are like the female characters who are like the mothers or the stepmothers, that like older generation. They're the ones that have like tabooed sex, like for those like girls, which in an essence, by tabooing sex for like the girls, they are turning the men into the animals. And so where you have, oh, a fairy turned me into a beast.
It's like the mothers of these young women are,
yes, except
in their minds turning men into beasts.
And that works when they're talking about, when Bruno Bettelheim is talking about like Beauty and the Beast, Hans my Hedgehog, possibly. But here's where some of the internal consistency like breaks down, where it's not cultural symbology that is like universal. Because in this story, the person who turned him into an animal was the dwarf.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, if it is this female character who is the one that like taboos it for the women, then it would have been, it's not even like a female character, let alone like their mother who does it. It's this dwarf that does it, which Bettelheim is pointing out that in this story, you have these like two main girls who can be seen as different facets of the same person. And then also the two males, the bear and the dwarf, can also be seen as two facets of the same person. And I'm like, can they though?
If you want to just say that.
Yeah, I guess if you wanted to say that.
I mean, for me, it's one of those things like, I do think it's interesting to think about things like that. You know, like, and people like all the time nowadays will talk about like a movie or whatever, and they'll go through and they'll have their like, here's my like elaborate theory on what this means. And it's interesting to see like, oh yeah, well, like you're saying, I mean, in this case, even you're like the internal consistency of that argument like falls apart anyway. But like to hear someone make an argument like that, it's like, okay, there's no way that the filmmaker was actually like thinking this when they made this, but it's interesting that you can read it in that way.
Yeah.
And that it does make sense. And then even to think about how like, okay, yeah, based on the things that they said, it makes sense. But if you also consider these other things are also part of the movie, you know, like, I don't know, there's something fun about thinking that way. Yeah. But the problem for me too is like in situations like this, they're like writing it down in a book. They're taking it to like the level of psychology. They're taking that and then they're like expanding that out to mean like, this is true about the world.
Yeah.
Is like the place where it's like, okay, I don't think that's like, you know, just fun and like, oh, interesting thought experiment. It's like that when you're like trying to say, like make claims about this is the way that the human mind works. And especially where the point that you made earlier, they're trying to like extrapolate it out to like all of humanity.
Yeah.
Like everyone in the world thinks this way. It's like you're making these arguments based on cultural assumptions from the culture that you grew up in that have certain like taboos around sex and whatever that don't exist in other cultures. So how is this like a universal human psychology thing and not just a cultural thing specific to your culture and how you grew up? Like,
because when you start to say like, oh, it's a universal, it's like in everybody, when it's a lot more of an interesting approach and possibly like truer in a sense, like more has like more consistency to say that like comparing the psychology of how one story and one culture kind of pans out and then looking at similar tale type, but how it is different, like on that, still talking about psychology. Like you could still be talking about like the need for, if we're talking about a story like Jack and the Beanstalk, you want to look at like, okay, this story is talking about this like meager, small, weak person who's able to like use wit to overcome. And then you're like, okay, that's interesting because like psychologically speaking, we might all feel, or children, even if we're like aiming this like at children might feel like, oh, I am weak. I am small. Do I have the power to protect myself against something that is big? When to them, everything in the world is big. And so psychologically, the story of Jack and the Beanstalk would be comforting to them because they are seeing this example of like, oh, small things can defeat big things, or I can use the powers that I do have, like my wit and ability or whatever, to enact change in the world. And then you look at a different story in a different place to see, okay, when I have an everyman in a story from like India, what does that everyman look like? How does he overcome big obstacles? What does that psychologically say about the people who created that story? So it's like you can still use psychology to look
Yeah.
at stories, but yeah, when you start to say, oh, well, there's this like universal symbolism, and then whenever you see an animal groom, that means that sex is taboo and men are animals like in marriage, and they, because then also it's like, how can we take that same logic to look at animal bride tales? Because it's not universal. And if it was universal, then like it would almost be like useless in a way of like, okay, yeah, I guess everybody likes water in stories, or like we all have seen a tree, because like, yeah, we all grapple with things. I mean, because I think like some of the stories that have stuck with us the most throughout the years, like we always bring up Death in a Nut. Death in a Nut is one that like
Yeah.
psychologically it does speak to us. And there are children's books, a children's book that I love that is the story of Death in a Nut. And it's a great story to introduce to children to talk about death, when death is a big scary thing that they do see happening, that like does happen like around you, because kids do go through scary things, and those things are hard to talk about, but there are better ways than just like slipping in subconscious messages to like children. There are better ways to like teach them how to navigate the world. And you can use fairy tales to teach children to navigate the world, but it's okay to be talking about it overtly instead of covertly, to make explicit what maybe the tales are like implying in them. Like, okay, make it more explicit so that children understand what you're talking about. And even if they still then can't get the concept of like, because after a kid hears the story of like Death in a Nut, I don't think that every 5-year-old is going to read through that and be like, oh, you know what? Now that I've read this story, I feel comfortable that someday I will die and all the people I know will die. I'm
Yeah.
comforted. No, I highly doubt that they're going to walk away these like fully actualized human beings. And it's not because the story
Yeah.
lacked anything. It's because like human development takes a lifetime.
Yeah. I was like, I'm as like a grown adult still, that story helped push the needle, but it's like, I'm not still like okay with the fact that, like my parents and loved ones are going to die someday,
Yeah.
like let alone myself, that story did help, but it's like, hearing that story, the few times that I have did not completely help me, make me work through those issues,
Yeah. And so, yeah, when it comes to viewing stories, fairy tales through the lenses of like psychoanalytics, I think there's definitely a place for understanding human psychology, or understanding how human psychology plays into how the stories get written and why they get retold, because they wouldn't get
Mhm.
retold and they wouldn't become so salient to us if they didn't speak to something psychologically in us. But that doesn't mean that it's all on an unconscious level, or that a shoe is a vagina, or that these grooms are how women view men generally, or view the topic of sex like as children.
Mhm.
So if people want to grab the uses of enchantment, the meaning and importance of fairy tales, just to flip through, read through, there's a lot of different chapters, and there's shorter sections within the chapters on specific tales. Some of them that we've already covered before, like Hansel and Gretel, that one might be interesting for people to read through. Just because with Hansel and Gretel, one thing that they talk about, which I was like, wow, that is really something. And Hansel and Gretel is this story that in the syllabus in the book teaching fairy tales, that it included for this topic of conversation, included Hansel and Gretel. That one is really interesting to look at the story as like a story about children starting to become themselves and learning that like they can navigate the world, but also where it a little goes off the rails for me personally. It that's not where it starts to go off the rails for me personally, but where it totally, I don't know, jumps the shark, goes yeah, is when they're talking about the oral fixation, so very Freudian, the oral fixation that like children have to be so self-focused and all-consuming that they are like eating and devouring this house, this place that could be their shelter in the woods. They're not thinking of it as that. They're only thinking about like their own selfish desires to like consume and eat. And in that way, the house represents the mother and how children consume all of their mother's like time and energy and like essence. And instead of nurturing this thing, like this entity that could continue to shelter them and care for them, they are devouring it. And I'm like, one, listen, sometimes it do feel like that, like with children.
Yeah, I think that's more indicative of the psychology of the person that wrote that analysis than it is of, people at large.
Because like also like as I'm reading that, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like that is really something to think about. That that is a really interesting take. So if people want to like check out the book, I wouldn't necessarily, tell you this is a must own, go out and buy. But definitely one worth checking out, reading some of the different sections on different fairy tales that like Snow White, like Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood. It is really fascinating. And it's fascinating to know the history of where analyzing fairy tales has been. And it shows how far we have come in analyzing fairy tales and finding ways to delve into fairy tales that are more useful and fruitful ground.
Thank you for listening to The Fairy Tellers. If you enjoy what we're doing, please leave us a review or share us with your friends. For access to exclusive bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefairytellers. Special thanks to Andy Forey for our music and to Clarice Inch for our artwork. And of course, a big thank you to all our patrons. Without all of you, this show wouldn't be possible.
Good stories pay little attention to cultural or linguistic frontiers. The student of story collections find themselves adrift on an ocean of stories, an ocean which is boundless, deep, and ceaseless in motion. Robert Irwin.
Welcome back to another exciting, you guessed it, episode. Another exciting episode of, you guessed it, The Fairy Tales. Please cut all of this.
No.